everyone. So want to thank the organizers for inviting me. And in the spirit of what Annie said, I'm just going to try to continue the conversation and do two things. I'll try to provide some scientific evidence on topics that we have discussed and debated a lot. And I'm going to try to paint a picture of the future because this is a topic that's very dear to my heart and something I've been studying for over a decade now. So before I dive into the material, here's a quick question. How many of the people in the room are in a completely, fully remote organization? Wow, that's very impressive. How about in some form of a hybrid arrangement? Okay? And how about 5 days in the office? Well, that's such a big relief. You know, turns out in other places I speak, we always have a few hands like that, so we have to convince the CEO who's insisting people on a 5-day RTO. But what I'll focus on is I'll make a quick business case on work from anywhere. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, so not a lot, I don't have to convince you guys very hard. And then I'll dive into, I think, what's more interesting, which is about managing the old remote format. So I think I don't need to tell you this. Remote work is here to stay. I get this question from more traditional companies and CEOs and CHROs. The data is telling us that people have looked at this quarter over quarter, and I know Nick Bloom is going to speak in the afternoon. He and his team have looked at this very closely. The numbers have stabilized very much around 30% of work days being done remotely in the US. But this includes all work days. So it includes manufacturing, it includes restaurants. Every Labor Day in the US, if you know what Labor Day is, it goes down a little bit to 27, then jumps back again to 29, 30%. And the second thing I want to make a distinction, again, I think this crowd, this audience doesn't need to be told this, work from anywhere is not work from home. So, I've been studying work from anywhere for several years now, and what I tell people is work from anywhere looks like this map on the right. This map, every dot, is a patent examiner in the US Patent Office around 2015. So around 2012, the US Patent Office let its examiners work from anywhere in the US, and that's very different from working from home, because these people could be working from co-working spaces, from Starbucks, from wherever they want, but they could choose where to live. And that is essentially what I've called geographic flexibility. I've studied this topic across a whole range of organizations. So very large organizations, relatively small startups. One fun study I'll talk about is with Unilever on thinking about remote work in the manufacturing space. But I've studied financial services. And some of my friends are in the room. So Amir from Doist. I've become good friends with folks at Zapier and GitLab. And so here is the quick business case. I won't take too long here because this is the choir. Just to reiterate one theme that I think you'll hear again and again and again, the business case for distributed work, for flexible work, for work from anywhere is very simple. It's about attracting and retaining talent, period. That's the business case. Yes, there might be some productivity gains, there might be some cost savings, but it's all about attracting and retaining talent. And when I say talent, what I mean is diverse talent. Once an organization adopts work from anywhere, you attract more women. A team at Wharton recently published a study looking at job postings by startups, and they found that the remote positions attracted women and minorities by a different factor of magnitude. So now we have data to show this. It's not just speculation. And Annie mentioned something which I completely agree, that the CEOs who are resisting this, the force they're against is the market. Because there's going to be attrition, there's going to be turnover from the companies that are not allowing flexible work arrangements to the ones that are allowing. And that labor market demand-supply dynamic will ultimately, in 5 to 10 years, force the equilibrium where all organizations will have to offer flexible work. So I'm going to now show some data on a study I did way before the pandemic. This was done around 2017-18. And we studied the US Patent Office. And the question they had for me, because they had to go back to the US Congress to justify this program that they did not call Work From Anywhere. They called it TEAP, a very cryptic acronym, and we can chat what TEAP means later. We found that a transition from working from home to working from anywhere resulted in about 4.4% higher productivity. And this is productivity that we could measure very, very objectively. It's the number of files that the patent examiner examines every week. We also found attrition went down. We found that their talent access expanded to the universities and colleges in the southern and the western part of the country. So all great news. And then they also, essentially being a government organization, they're constantly having a problem of attracting talent, and they made this whole arrangement permanent. Now, since then, one topic, one theme that I've been very, very closely observing is this phenomena of all remote organizations. Of course, many of the folks in the room, you are in one of them. And I would say this is relatively novel. This is about 10 years, I would say. And one thing that I'm focused on right now is the question of, is distributed work, is work from anywhere only for office workers? Is it only for people who can sit at a desk and work on the computer? And here is one of the most exciting projects I'm working on right now. With Unilever, we're trying to reimagine distributed work in the manufacturing setting. And the way it happens is through a digital twin. And some of you probably know what a digital twin is. So in a sense, what you do is you take any physical operation, you put sensors, you collect any kind of data that's relevant in real time. All the data goes to a cloud, and then machine learning algorithms predict whatever decisions need to be taken. So I'll make this very specific. In the case of this Unilever project, they have a plant making detergent in Brazil. So this tower you are seeing here at the back, they pour liquid detergent on the top. There is gas that dries it, and you get those solid crystals that we get in our pods. What they did is they inserted sensors in the tower to measure everything about the liquid, the flow rate, the temperature, the pressure. All that data was collected onto a cloud, and then a machine learning algorithm predicted how much gas to release second by second. And on the day of the pilot, here's a fun fact, this entire operation was run from the kitchen table of the operator living far away. So now on paper, Unilever has 3 detergent-making factories in the world. 4, actually. South Africa, Indonesia, 1 in the US, and 1 in Brazil. We could run all 4 factories from right here. And the same principle of digital twins leading to work from anywhere is now extending to hospitals. The hospitals in New York have done this. They've installed an emergency room which is virtual, and my doctoral student looked at that and found patient outcomes became better because the doctor was able to focus attention on the patients that really needed that care. The airport in Rome has done one, and my favorite example is oil rigs. None of us want to go and live in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on an oil rig. So I think the future for all the entrepreneurs in the room is to say, how do we make digital twins possible in every part of the economy in a way that extends distributed work to every possible industry? And this will take a lot of work, decades of work, but this is a real opportunity, much more, I would argue, than the metaverse. I would argue digital twins is a real opportunity right now across industries for entrepreneurs to find business models. And my clicker seems stuck. Can the tech team help me? So I guess, I was going to say that, probably the clicker just loves digital twins, right? So it wants to stay there. But, I think we've talked about this. The enemy of work from anywhere, and I think Annie mentioned this, is time zones. And we now have data on this. So we conducted a very large study with ExxonMobil, collecting all their internal communication over several months. And we found the obvious, that when you are temporally more distant, you have less communication. But this might be interesting. We found that the negative effect of time zones was much more for women. Because women in this study were less able to move their meetings after office hours. It was also less for, the negative effect was more for countries where there are official, there are more stringent norms, if you may, of what an office hour looks like. So think Australia instead of Russia. So, and that means that you are creating, if you don't acknowledge time zones and you don't solve for that problem, you are creating an uneven playing field for workers based on their gender, based on where they live. And this is a problem, again, entrepreneurs in the room should take seriously and try to think about. So I'm going to offer a few solutions, but I just want to lay out, this is hot off the press. There's a new study that I'm going to write about on my LinkedIn handle. And this is now official data done very carefully. For the nerds in the room, the way we tease the effect is using daylight savings, because daylight savings exogenously, randomly changes the time zone difference between people. And big shout out to my co-author, Jasmina Chauvin at Georgetown, for this study. Now, this is a question I get asked a lot by more traditional CEOs. So one of the solutions, I think Annie also mentioned this, to the time zone problem is we need some in-person time. I don't think any organization ever says, we'll never do in person. But one of the questions that I get a lot is, what is that optimal percentage? And I'll be honest, I don't know. And I'm going to tell you just one study, which might give you a template for trying to answer the question. So we ran this experiment, and this is also now a forthcoming paper. We essentially ran this experiment in an organization in Bangladesh where they had never done remote work. They were always 5 days in the office, but for a period of 9 weeks, the CEO allowed us to run lotteries every day to decide who would work from the office versus who would work remotely. And in this study, what we find is that about 25% days in person was optimal. So this is what I'm going to say. For this organization, in this setting, it was HR workers, 25% was optimum. And those workers in that intermediate category, like not too much in person, not completely cut off, did better across all the outcomes we could observe. Their self-reported job satisfaction, even their productivity if they were a manager. So I think, but this is the message from this study. You can run your own experiment. With your own team, you can run your experiment over a period of 5 weeks to find out what that optimal in-person is. And the reason, this is, I think, the more important takeaway. Why do I believe, as a scholar, that we need about 25% or something in the middle? Because when we are working remotely, there are two things happening. There's the positive effect of flexibility on productivity. So flexibility helps us become more productive. That is what my US Patent Office study showed. But isolation hurts productivity. Flexibility has a positive effect. Isolation has a negative effect. If you put these two together, conceptually, the sweet spot is somewhere in between. So this has been my argument to the CEOs in the financial services industry and insurance, and the real sort of no, we're going to do 5 days a week, that you need to be in the middle because you want the best of both worlds. You want flexibility without isolation. And I think Annie mentioned this. I'm echoing a lot of the topics that came in the prior presentation. I believe the right unit of analysis is the team. It's not the company, it's not the individual, it's the team. So the team should decide how to structure that 25% time. Both the frequency, because think about, 25% can be done in many ways. It could be 1 day every week. It could be done 1 whole week every month. It could be a longer period of time, once every 2 months. And I think teams should decide this rather than some top-down mandate saying 2 days a week, every week, which makes no sense. So, if you and I are on the same team and I go Monday, Tuesday, and you're going Thursday, Friday, we're never meeting. And I walk around these companies' offices now, and I see people coming to the office, putting on their headphones, and coding, or doing some Excel, or joining a Zoom meeting. That makes no sense. So I think the right level of analysis is the team. The team should decide both the frequency of the meeting as well as the venue. It doesn't have to be in the downtown office. So which brings me to another favorite topic of mine, something I'm working on now, and I'm hoping this would be helpful to everyone in the room. So one theme that just fascinates my imagination is whether in the future, 5 years from now, whether the offsite would become the office. Whether the entire downtown would evaporate or convert into residential or universities or labs, and whether companies and organizations would conduct all their in-person time at offsites, like this. And I think there are many, many benefits of that. We don't have any real scientific evidence on whether the offsite works. So what I'm going to show you is arguably the first piece of evidence. And this is something I should acknowledge my co-authors from INSEAD, who have worked with me on this piece. So what we did is we studied one of the offsites at Zapier. So thank you, Zapier. You've been great friends and collaborators. And what we studied is whether, and before I go there, I think even the CEO of Glassdoor, so Glassdoor closed down all its offices recently, and Sutherland Wong said recently that we don't even need an office presence eventually. What we need is event spaces, and we need to bring people together for shorter periods of time. So even in the minds of some really visionary CEOs, they're seeing the offsite as the new office. So what we studied is an offsite that happened in 2020, January, so just before COVID. And here is, I'm going to share three sort of findings. The finding that blew my mind is the following. You go to an offsite to make connections, correct? Everyone would agree with me? And connections with people who you've never met, who are different from you, not the same function, not the same department. We looked at all the data of how the Slack communication happened over months after the offsite. And what we found is that, first of all, communication on Slack was very much within ethnic silos, and the communication became more ethnically siloed after the offsite. And so essentially what that means is that we go to an offsite, a place like this, and we find people just like us, and we connect. That's human behavior. And in sociology, that's been called homophily. This is the classic case of homophily at play. We go to an offsite, we find people like us, we have a similar effect for gender. But the ethnic effect is very strong. And so the question is, and I would argue the same thing happens in the office. In the office too, I've walked through cafeterias of tech companies all over the world. I see people sitting at lunch tables in ethnic groups. So how do we then essentially solve for this problem? So in this study, the way we did that was to observe who traveled in the same cab ride, the same taxi, from the airport to the offsite. And there we find if two dissimilar people, different ethnicities, different gender, traveled in the same taxi from the airport. This was a 30-minute taxi ride in Orlando, Florida. Then you come back, and then later, weeks later, you make a connection on Slack. So we've called that cab ride a liminal space. Now here's my suggestion to this group of brilliant people. How do we organize liminal spaces? How do we design liminal spaces? How do we design liminal spaces in offices? How do we design liminal spaces in places like this? I don't know the answer, but something we can all together put our minds together and figure out. But we need to find a way for people who are not similar, and we've called that engineering serendipity. We have to engineer serendipitous interactions when people are in together. Elsewise, if you give people the agency, they're going to find people just like them. They'll spend the whole day with people just like them. They will not meet dissimilar people. So as entrepreneurs, as managers, we need to think about how do we engineer serendipity. I've also looked at virtual water coolers, and virtual water coolers is a great idea because it completely demolishes hierarchy. You can have an intern speak to a CEO. And I have distinguished between virtual water coolers and Zoom happy hours. I hate Zoom happy hours because the same group of 10 extroverts come and the introverts avoid them or they have the camera off. A virtual water cooler is a randomized interaction between two people who don't know each other. And we ran an experiment with a large bank on this. And what we found is that having a virtual interaction with a CXO, led to positive effects on both performance and the probability of getting a job. This was a group of interns who were being randomly allocated to these virtual water coolers by us, the researchers. And we found that if you had a virtual water cooler with a senior person, that led to a positive effect on performance ratings and the probability of getting a job. So that's the blue bars. That's a positive effect. But the positive effect was way higher if the senior manager had the same demographics as the intern. Same gender, same race. So between those two studies, the Offsite study and the virtual water cooler study, what we have discovered, and I'm not surprised because homophily theory has been there for 50 years, that human beings by nature are attracted to people just like them. And that's a problem, or not a problem, that's a pattern we should recognize and work around and find solutions for. So I guess, what else have I observed in my research to solve the time zone problems? I think knowledge codification. Knowledge codification is something that was taught to me by the GitLab people, and they have an excellent code book where they have information on every question that starts with the word how. And I would argue that now with large language models, there's going to be a new sort of energy behind knowledge codification. So I'll just share this study that we are working on right now. It's not published yet, so don't quote me on just this one. Everything else I showed you has been published. So this is, again, with Zapier. So I worked very closely with Wade Foster, and we created a bot that communicates just like Wade. So we took all the written material and the speeches Wade had done over the years, and then we wrote a rephraser algorithm to essentially convert any piece of text that Wade had written into more of the median person on the internet. And using that, we ran an experiment where we crowdsourced questions from Zapier, and we had the questions answered by the real Wade and the bot Wade. And we showed those answers to Zapier employees, and we asked them to do a Turing test. Guess which one is this by the CEO or by the bot? And, big surprise, the Turing test, the LLM passed the Turing test with remarkable colors. So human beings were absolutely not able, it was, by chance it's 50%, the probability of guessing the right answer was 56%. So just better than chance. But I think this opens up a whole realm of opportunities for how we communicate while being distributed. Will each one of us have a communication bot? How do we communicate with the bot? How do the bots communicate with each other? What does it mean for perception about, real human communication versus not? I don't know the answers, but, along with you guys, this is a topic I think I'm very excited to study over the next few years. I think large language models and communication has to be one of our North Stars for this community. So I'm almost at the end of my talk, so I'm just going to summarize, and I think Annie did this beautifully. She said 4,000 people at Atlassian have gone through bottom-up experiments. So this is a pitch I make to these older generation CEOs at insurance companies, and I have nothing against insurance companies. I love but I've just found the rigidity to be a little more on that side, that don't try to put mandates top down. Listen and experiment. This is a plane we are flying while building it. So there has to be some top-down diagnostic for sure. There has to be some bottom-up experimentation. There has to be some best practice sharing between teams. And eventually, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, you will get to solidified best practices across the organization, while taking into account that the world is changing super fast. The digital twin model is here. The LLM opportunities here. So what's the best practice today may not be a best practice tomorrow. We need to continuously experiment and find new best practices. So I've written about this. This is an article that was published in the Harvard Business Review as a cover back in 2020. And this is my new book coming out next year. So this is the first time I'm showing the cover to any crowd. Because I figured this is family, as close as family at work could be for me. So I hope the organizers invite me back next year to have a physical copy of the book with me. But thank you guys again, and I'm looking forward to your questions and your thoughts.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Do I have to remind you all? Thank you, people in the back that got it. Amazing. Do we have any questions in the audience? No questions? Oh, there we go. Where's our microphone?
I can project. Can everyone hear me? No. I'm always so excited by your research, Raj.
Thank you.
Why do you think people are still talking about weeks as the unit of time? So when I see conversations around hybrid, you're having conversations with many more traditional CEOs than I'm having. And you identified 25% as the sweet spot where you get the returns on productivity and don't suffer the gains of isolation or the negative. You know what I'm trying to say. But it still feels like the conversation is happening in a week's basis. Why do you think that is? And what do you think the right model should be?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So just to reiterate, even in our study, that 25% was not every week. It was 25% over the 9-week experimental period. So I totally agree. Why are CEOs still thinking about, how many days every week? I can only speculate. So I think the 2 reasons. One, there's a lot of inertia. We used to do 5 days a week, so it has to be some X number of days a week. The second is leasing costs, right? They've committed to these leases that are going to expire and go away over the next few years. So I think they just cannot imagine a world where people could meet 1 week every month. But I think that's good for individuals, and that's good for hiring. And that's why they should imagine this. So I totally agree. And I've seen creative ways the leasing problem has been solved. Subleases. A lot of companies have done subleases. And I think, that's something that, again, to reiterate, the labor market will teach them if they don't want to learn it right now.
We have an online question, and we have a question coming over here. So if the mic can start working that way, we have one over there, one over there. Awesome. So Jay, who is a co-founder at Athium Holdings, asked 2 questions. 1, which industries are best suited for distributed work? And 2, how do you see the future of education with regards to the choices in career paths?
Yeah. So I think the tech industry, of course, has led the charge on distributed work, for sure. But honestly, given digital twins, and that's why I feel we're just scratching the surface on distributed work. Unilever is a great example. I'm actually working with an energy company in Turkey right now. And we're going to run a fun experiment in the summer. Maybe I'll come back next year and tell you about it. They have 16 power plants all over Turkey. And it's a company called Enerjisa Serotim. And they had this problem where young engineers don't want to go and live in these mountain towns in Turkey because their families don't want to live there. Like, everyone wants to live in Istanbul or Ankara. So they created a digital twin with a digital twin headquarters in Istanbul where all of the 16 plants can be run from that one single room. So I feel energy, hospitals, manufacturing, supply chain, warehouses. That's where the action will be. And for the entrepreneurs in the room, we need to find ways to make distributed work and work from anywhere possible in those settings. So I think that traditional white-collar, blue-collar barrier has been broken. The desk-less versus desk barrier has been broken. We need to now help those entrepreneurs like Energisia, Ceratim, and Unilever make distributed work real. And what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
About career paths and education. How do you see this will impact
Yeah,
education?
Absolutely. I feel the education industry is going to be disrupted big time. And it's already happening. London Business School recently started a one-year master's program where I teach at HBS. All of the exec programs work in a hybrid format. There's some classes, and then people just go off and do a lot of async learning. But I can imagine a new kind of business school or university where they don't have the legacy and the inertia that traditional colleges have, and they could disrupt education big time.
Question over here.
Raj, that was excellent. Thank you for that. The taxi ride from the airport to the space is fascinating, and the definition of that type of space being a liminal space. Have you done any research, or is there any ideation on what that might manifest as in an office environment, or does that need to be an office? I think that's maybe part of the question as well. So has there been any progression towards practically what that might look like?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I think, I've been speaking to some architects. So this is a relatively recent finding, relatively a recent research project. But, in the office buildings that we have, we need to find ways to manage the flow of traffic of people so that we have engineered serendipity. I don't know what that is. But, if there are ideas in the room, I would love to learn from you guys or work with you on this topic. We need it. It cannot seem contrived. I think that's a consensus among us researchers. So if the company said, go and talk, that's not engineered serendipity. That's like another task I have to do. It has to be bumping into each other that seems natural enough, but where the hand of the designer is playing a role up there.
We have a question over here. Oh, there, you already have it. Stand, please.
Hi, Raj. Steve from Zillow. The graph where you saw productivity increase from go down from isolation. Have you seen any research that can touch on that being needed to be in person, or if you can combat isolation through virtual connection, and any research that you see that speaks to that?
Yeah, so that study itself, we found that the 25% number of days in the 9 weeks was optimal. But the virtual water cooler study that we had, I showed the results around performance and the probability of getting a job. They also felt more connected if they had spoken to a senior leader who was just like them.
Over here. Stan, when you ask your question, please give your name, the company you're with, and then ask your question.
Hi, Raj. I'm Alex. I work with executive teams to play with new ways of work. And one of the pain points I find, even with executive teams who are open to experimenting, is once the distributed work experiment is designed, and they say to middle managers, okay, now go ahead and run this experiment, you have different levels of experience managing distributed teams. You have different levels of willingness to participate in that experiment, and then you also have the power dynamics of some managers getting more leeway than others, some managers having, getting a shorter leash during their experiment. I'm wondering, when you design experiments, how do you regulate for some of the human power dynamics that emerge when you're running experiments at scale?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is very relevant for large traditional companies that are trying to figure out what to do in this new world. I have a short answer. And I would imagine a person like Amir or Annie would agree with me. This thing can only work if it's done at the top. So my go-to sort of solution has been, I would only work with a company on a transformation project if the C-suite committed to the experiment themselves. And I'll tell you why. Because if the C-suite adopts the new ways of working, there's a tremendous messaging that percolates down the hierarchy. Then every middle manager wants to do the same because they all want to do what the C-suite is doing. So my recommendation to every organization is, guys, if you're serious about this, you have to commit time. The C-suite has to be the first pilot.
Hey, Raj, it's Brian over here.
Hey, Brian.
Way over here. I know you've done some work on economic development, the impact of remote work, like with Tulsa Remote and others. What are you seeing these days in terms of the sort of net benefits and net trade-offs? Because central business districts are obviously under siege, but other places are growing. How are you thinking about that set of trade-offs?
No, thank you, Brian. And apologies, I missed that part. Maybe my clicker was stuck at that point. It's a deeply passionate topic, and I think my friends from Tulsa Remote are in the room. Justin's, yeah. So hey, Justin. So it's been one of the sort of the biggest revelations to me for why I love work from anywhere and distributed work, because my journey as a scholar started in studying migration. And if you've noticed migration, we have experienced this 5-decade phenomenon of brain drain, where talent has moved from emerging markets to the West. And even within the Western countries, talent has moved from the smaller towns to the larger cities. And I think what work from anywhere and distributed work do is they give the smaller towns a chance for the first time. And so Justin at the back and his team has done amazing work where they have now been able to move 3,000 remote workers and their families to Tulsa. It's a city of 1 million people. And Justin and Ben let us study that. And what we found in that context was that these people going back to Tulsa from places like LA and Houston and New York, their real income went up dramatically because house costs a fifth in Tulsa compared to New York. But the give back they gave to the society was in the following way. They had much higher volunteering hours to the local community. So that study is published now as well. And the reason they were able to volunteer is anywhere in Tulsa is a shorter commute. Going to the blood bank, to the local school, to the food bank, everywhere is 20 minutes compared to in New York, it would mean like an hour to commute to the local food bank. So I think smaller towns are getting talent back, and these workers are giving back to these smaller towns. And I think I missed this as well in my slides. The other comparable phenomena, which I think entrepreneurs should think about, is the digital nomad phenomenon. I've written about this in an HBR article. Prior to the pandemic, there were two countries, Estonia and Barbados, who had a special visa for remote workers. Now it is 58 countries, including Italy, which did one last month. Turkey did one like 2 weeks back. So how do we manage the lives of digital nomads is a great entrepreneurial opportunity, and there are many, many pain points that need to be solved there.
Thank you so much, Raj. Round of applause.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.